वासुदेवाय।
ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय।
ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय।
वासुदेवाय।
ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय।
नारायणं नमस्कृत्य
नारायणं नमस्कृत्य
नरं चैव नरोत्तमं
नरं चैव नरोत्तमं
देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं
देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं
ततो जयमुदीरये नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु
नष्टप्रायेषु बालेषु
नित्यं भागवत सेवया
नित्यं भागवत सेवया
भगवती उत्तमा श्लोके
भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी
Series, chapter 8, reading the Supreme, text number 90, and we also read text number 20. So I will read text number 20 for myself, and 19 for myself, and 20 will read. Bhutagramah sa evayam bhutva bhutva praliyate ratri agame vashaha partha prabhavati ahar agame. Word to word meaning. Bhutagramah, the aggregate of all living entities, saha, they, eva, certainly, ayam, this, bhutva bhutva, taking birth, praliyate, annihilate, ratri, night, agame, on arrival, avashaha, automatically, partha, O son of Pritha, prabhavanti, manifest, aha, during daytime, agame, on arrival. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Again and again the day comes, and this host of beings is active. And again the night falls, O Partha, and they are helplessly dissolved. Text 20. Paraha tasmat tu bhavaha anyaha parastasmat bhavanyo avyaktaha
अव्यक्तात्
सनातनः
व्यक्तो
व्यक्तात् सनातनः
व्यक्तात् सनातनः
यः
यः
सः
सः
सर्वेषु
भूतेषु
यः सः सर्वेषु भूतेषु
नश्यत्सु
न विनश्यति नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः सर्वेषु भूतेषु नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः
सनातनः
या सा सर्वेषु भूतेषु नास्यासु न विनश्यति
न विनश्यति
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु
सर्वेषु भूतेषु
नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः
व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः
यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
Online. परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु
सर्वेषु भूतेषु
Prabhu is leading. Yes. Now all of us can repeat. Nashyatsu na vinashyati.
नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
Parastasmattu bhavanyo.
व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः
व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः
यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु
यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु
नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
परस्तस्मात् भावन्यो
सनातनः
व्यक्तो व्यक्तात् सनातनः
यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु
यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु
नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति
Word to word meaning. Paraha, transcendental. Tasmat,
तस्मात्
from that.
from that
To, but.
but
Bhavaha,
bhavah
nature.
nature
Anyaha,
अन्यः
another.
another
Avyaktaha,
अव्यक्तः
unmanifest.
unmanifest
Avyakta,
अव्यक्ता
from the unmanifest.
from the unmanifest
Sanatanaha,
सनातनः
eternal.
eternal
Yaha,
यः
that.
that
Saha,
सः
which.
which
Sarveshu,
सर्वेषु
all.
all
Bhuteshu,
भूतेषु
manifestation.
manifestation
Nashyatsu,
नश्यत्सु
being annihilated.
being annihilated
Na,
न
never.
never
Vinashyati,
विनश्यति
annihilated.
annihilated
Translation and Prabhupada by Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Translation. Yet there is another nature which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and is never annihilated. When all in this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. Translation with repetition. Yet
Yet
there is another nature
there is another nature
which is eternal
which is eternal
and is transcendental
and is transcendental
to this manifested and unmanifested matter.
to this manifested and unmanifested matter.
It is supreme
It is supreme
and is never annihilated.
and is never annihilated.
And all in this world
When all in this world
is annihilated,
is annihilated,
that part remains as it is.
that part remains as it is.
Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Krishna's superior spiritual energy is transcendental and eternal. It is beyond all the changes of material nature, which is manifest and annihilated during the days and nights of Brahma. Krishna's superior energy is completely opposite in quality to material nature. Superior and inferior nature are explained in the 7th chapter. Thus, Transcendental Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnana Janashalakya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Prachadine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatadine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So we are in the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, attaining the Supreme, and we are almost towards the second half of this chapter, where Lord is describing about the different aspects of perfection and who are the perfect devotees and how they come back to Him. And once they come back to Him, they never come back. And who are those? Those are the devotees. And then there is also a description about those who do not attain that perfection and what happens to them. And then in the last verse, we also saw about the planetary system or the time scale of Brahma's one day and one night. So continuing that, in today's verse, there are 2 verses today. So we'll try to pay more attention to the 19th verse because the verse 20 and 21 are more connected. So as we will look into the next verse 21st, we will also look at some of the other aspects of the verse 20. But we'll briefly look into that today also. So this verse 19 is also a very important and interesting verse, for it brings out what happens at the end of the day of Brahma and at the beginning of the night of Brahma and the beginning of the day, what happens. So here, Lord is explaining this to Arjuna, and here he's saying, Sabhuta Gramaha. So the first thing to note here is that Lord is referring here to the aggregate of living entities. The word Bhuta means living entities and Gramaha means the aggregate. There is another similar word which is also used, is Indriya Gramaha. The word Indriya Gramaha means a group of senses. So the network of senses, a group of senses. So similarly here, the Lord is referring to all the aggregate of living entities. Now, who are this aggregate of living entities? That we saw in 2 words earlier, where it says, Abrahma Bhuna Lokaha Punaravartino Arjuna. So there are people who are traveling with different planetary systems, sometimes upward and sometimes lower planetary systems. There are these living entities who are in this material world, transmigrating from one place to another, in one body to another, but they are still within this cycle of the material world. So there are this group of living entities who are in the material world, and they are doing something, and something is happening to them, and they are doing something. That's what this verse is talking about. And in other words, the living entities can be classified into 2 categories. One is Nitya Siddha and one is Nitya Bhatta. The Nitya Siddha are those living entities. They're not the Lord. They are the living entities who are never, they never become a victim of the material energy or Maya. Even though the Nitya Siddhas, the perfected beings, even though they may be in the material world, they do not become a victim of the material energy. Whereas Nitya Bhatta, they're always um, they're always victimized by the material energy. So this entire Krishna consciousness movement and this all instructions by the Lord is meant to help these category of living entities, these Bhuta Gramaha, or these aggregate of living entities, to come to the platform of Nitya Siddha. Or in other words, the Nitya Bhatta living entities who are eternally conditioned, who are transmigrating this material world, they are given an opportunity by all these instructions. And Prabhupada also mentions in various places that the entire Krishna consciousness movement is trying to rectify this madman tendency, the living entities, the conditioned living entities, and take them back to the spiritual world. So that is exactly what Lord Krishna is also doing here. So he's explaining what happens to those aggregate of living entities who are traveling this systems. Prabhupada often tells that a conditioned living entity is compared to like a madman. Just like a madman, he said, Pishachi Paile, Matta Channa Paile. So just like a ghostly haunted person, he will not be aware of what is right, what is wrong, what he is not, what is going to happen to by his actions. He's not aware, he's ghostly haunted. Similarly, people in the material world are haunted by so many different false identities. Their activities are driven by some whimsical nature. So treating a madman is so difficult. Similarly, the conditioned living entity to bring back his real constitutional position is also a very difficult task. And therefore, Prabhupada says it is not easy to transform even one living entity come back to his original constitutional position. But that is why the Krishna consciousness movement has been established, so that we all get an opportunity to practice this and move away from this aggregate of all living entities who are struggling in this material existence. And Prabhupada also says that the Krishna consciousness movement is, Prabhupada uses a specific word, which is so nice. Prabhupada says that this Krishna consciousness movement sometimes cannot be understood by people because they think, oh, what are these people? Just like when one goes to a mental hospital, sometimes there are too many patients, too many people who are not well situated. So when they see the doctor, they think the doctor is a madman. Similarly, Prabhupada says, sometimes when devotees go out to help people, they think, oh, what kind of person is he? Why is he saying all this? Why is he trying to be so harsh? So on and so forth. But Prabhupada says that just like a madman is not able to understand treatment, that does not mean one will stop the treatment. Similarly, when devotees go out to preach, to distribute books, to invite people, there will be opposition, there will be people who will dismiss the entire idea. But the point here is, Prabhupada says that we should still go out and invite people to this Krishna consciousness movement, because this Krishna consciousness movement is the only movement which is actually helping one or any other bona fide spiritual movement, is the one that is helping one to come out of the cycle of birth and death. So these are those living entities, Bhuta Gramaha, who are traveling in this material world, topmost planet to the bottommost planet, and they undergo something at the beginning of the day and the end of the day of Brahma. So here it said Bhutva Bhutva. So they come into being, or they take birth, or in the translation Prabhupada, I say become active. So these group of living entities who are in the material existence, they become active. So basically, at the start of the day of Brahma, which we saw last time was 4.3 million, no, 4.3 million, 32 million years is the one day of Brahma, and then the 100 years is few trillions of years. So we can see that for this period of time, the living entities become active. And at the end of the night, so that is Ratri Agame, the arrival of night, again, this aggregate of living entities, they become praliyated, or they get annihilated, or they become inactive. So this is very significant how wonderfully the scriptures are revealing on a cosmic scale what happens, how things happen. Just like we're seeing a time scale of Brahma, whose one day is so huge. The four yugas combined together into 1,000 makes one day of Brahma. So you can see how huge is the time scale. Now, in this beginning of the day, the living entities come into active state, and then at the night, there is an annihilation. Actually, there are two different kinds of annihilation, largely categorized. One is this kind of annihilation, which happens at the night of Brahma, the beginning of the night of Brahma. Another at the end of the lifespan of Brahma, that is the 100 years of Brahma. So during the night, there is a partial annihilation. Partial annihilation means not all the cosmic manifestation of the universe is dissolved. No. There are only certain planetary systems which are dissolved, and there are still few planetary systems which remain unaffected. But at the end of 100 years of Brahma, all the living entities are both the material energy, the Mahatattva, and the aggregate of Jiva Tattva, the living entities, they all go back to the body of Vishnu. And Prabhupada also explains that when the living entities become inactive, it is not to be thought that they are no more existing as individual. Sometimes people say, oh, they have merged into the body of the Lord, so they become one with the Lord, or some things like that. But Prabhupada says that's not true. Even though the living entity may become inactive, he does not lose his identity. And Prabhupada, in order to explain this further, gives another example of that of a man sleeping in the night. Just like a man may be very active in the daytime, but when he goes to sleep in the night, he forgets everything. He forgets who he is, what his role is, what his duties are, what he's supposed to do, what he's not supposed to do. He's not aware of it. He's sleeping. But as soon as the next day comes, he wakes up and he immediately remembers, oh, I'm the president of this company. Oh, I'm a devotee. I should go here. I should do this. So many things become again manifested in the memory and the intelligence of the living entity and the identity of the living entity when one starts to function. So similarly, Prabhupada says, just like we sleep, similarly at the end of the day of Brahma, at the beginning of night, there is this partial devastation and the living entities become inactive. And when they become inactive, they have to again wait for that duration of time, that huge duration of time that Brahma is sleeping. And then again, they come back to have the active state. And the Lord creates this manifestation again, Lord, so that the living entities are given one more chance to come out of this aggregate of living entities who are circling in this particular world. And then can go back to the spiritual world. So here the Lord is describing this state of the devastation and the activities of the living entities during the day, what happens, and night, what happens to them. And one must also remember during the complete devastation that happens, which is after 100 years of Brahma. But as we see from Brahma Samhita, the lifespan of Brahma is the period of time that the Lord excels. So we can see the 100 years of Brahma is so small when we look at from even higher perspective from the perspective of Lord's breathing. So the Vedic literatures very elaborately explain how vast this material universe is and how the different activities, the different manifestations take place, and how the Lord is involved in all of this. And one other word that is very significant in this verse is avashaha. The word avashaha refers to automatically, or in the purport in the translation, Prabhupada writes helplessly. So it is very important to remember that the living entities, although they do not want to become inactive, they are forced to become inactive. Even though they may not want to become active, they are forced to become active. And neither one can stop the day and night of Brahma. So this is another very significant point, that we are not actually the controllers. We are very, very tiny, minute controllers. The real controller is the Lord. It is by His supreme will that these cosmic manifestation is coming into existence, is being maintained, and again annihilated. So how tiny we are in the real time scale of this, our existence in this material world, this form of life that we are having right now, is so small. And this grand cosmos, our presence is so small that we, by being covered by illusion, we think ourselves to be so significant. We think my idea is the highest idea. I am not in control of anyone. I can control these things. So one who is influenced by material consciousness, by covered, victimized by material energy, wrongly thinks that I can control the material energy. I can control birth, death, old age, and disease by my own abilities, or by changing the laws of nature. But here we can clearly see that these things happen automatically. In fact, not even automatically, but more specifically by the will of the Supreme Lord. So this is a very important point as how the devastation annihilation takes place. There is more description in Srimad Bhagavatam, where there are different kinds of annihilations that are described. Although there are two primary, as I mentioned, the one partial, one complete, but then there are also other devastations or annihilations that take place when Manus appear. So there are 14 Manus that they appear in the day of Brahma. There are different kinds of annihilations, and Srimad Bhagavatam gives a lot more details about what happens during this annihilation and so on and so forth. But that is for another time. But it is significant to note how long these material, the living entities have to remain in this material world, and also how long they have to remain inactive in this material world. And in this way, they continue their life. But Lord, being very merciful, is also giving them an opportunity to come out of this. And that's why He's creating this cosmic creation again and again. And also, in the scriptures, this material manifestation is also compared to clouds. Just like clouds exist for some duration of time, if you look at the sky, the clouds exist for a very short duration of time. And then they become annihilated. Then they again come back. So similarly, the sky can be thought of like a spiritual existence, a spiritual sky. And the cloud like a material manifestation. Similarly, the existence of this material world, even that of the lifespan of Brahma or that of an insignificant ant, they just come into being for some short duration, they vanish again. But the Lord, being merciful, also provides one with the knowledge of another kind of sky, the spiritual sky, and how one can transfer to that spiritual sky. So the second verse, that is verse 20, we saw today, Parastasmatu bhavanyo. There is, Lord is saying, there is this one kind of nature that we were talking about, Brahma Bhuvana Lokaha, that we are seeing how there is Sahasra Yuga Paryantam, there is this scale of time of Brahma, there is this material universes that are present. But Lord is now saying there is another nature, Bhavaha, nature. There is another nature. And what is the quality of that nature beyond this existence of this kinds of material universes? Is that is Paraha. So Paraha, Prabhupada sometimes refer as superior and sometimes it's transcendental. So basically, this universe or this existence that the Lord is now explaining is of a different kind. And that nature is transcendental and that is superior to other existence. Avyakta Sanatanaha. So one of the characteristics of that existence, which is beyond this material existence, is it is eternal and it is transcendental. So eternal means it always exists, both in the present, past, and future. Just the living entity being eternal is also seeking to be in an atmosphere which is eternal. And therefore, the real shelter of the living entity is in that spiritual existence. Just like Prabhupada gives the example of a fish outside of water. Fish inside the water is very comfortable, can swim through and feel happy. But as soon as the fish is out of the water, the living entity, the fish starts to feel uncomfortable. It is not the territory of the fish, and therefore, being incompatible with the atmosphere, it struggles and eventually dies. Similarly, the living entity, whose nature is eternal, when the living entity is placed in an atmosphere of temporariness or temporary manifestation of this material existence, the living entity undergoes a state of anxiety. Therefore, the living entity can never be peaceful in this material world. The living entity can never be happy in this material world because that's not the nature of the living entity. And this incompatibility will always trouble the living entity. And therefore, sometimes the living entity may think, by changing some adjustments in this material world, I may be able to find better state of happiness or freedom from anxiety. But in truth, but being either on the sensual platform or on the mental platform or even in the intellectual platform does not satisfy the soul. The soul has to move to the spiritual platform. It has to come to, that's why Prabhupada, whenever devotees expressed various problems, Prabhupada would immediately give one constant solution all the time, is that please come to the spiritual platform. Because as soon as we come to the spiritual platform, all of the problems that we have, they tend to go away. So here, Lord is further explaining what is that nature of that spiritual existence is. And here, Lord is saying that is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. Avyaktaha avyaktat. So Prabhupada gives a wonderful example to illustrate manifestation and unmanifested state of existence. So Prabhupada gives the example of just like we see, there is a lot of concrete, there is a lot of sand, there is a lot of water, and so many other ingredients which are present. But that does not mean that we see a grand building. But when all of those ingredients come together in a specific way, then when they're put together, you can see a grand skyscraper. So when a skyscraper comes, we see a certain manifestation. But in its unmanifested state, it may be present in its gross elements. So similarly, the material manifestation is also present in the Mahatattva or in its initial ingredients, and sometimes it is not manifest. But when by the will of the Lord, and Lord glances the material energy also gets manifested in various forms. So this material world means sometimes it is visible to us, it's manifest, and sometimes it is unmanifest. So this is the nature of the material existence. That is, it exists in this form for some time, then it vanishes. It does not exist always in this form. And then again, by Lord's creation, again this comes into existence. Whereas the nature of the spiritual world is that it is not created sometimes. It is not that its ingredients are sometimes present, sometimes not present. Sometimes it is built, sometimes it is not built. It's not like that. The nature of the spiritual existence, it is always existing. It does not require any creation. It does not undergo annihilation. So that is also mentioned. Nashyat-suna vinashyati. It is never annihilated. It is always existing. It's a different existence altogether. Now, it is very difficult for someone in the very beginning to understand these concepts because the faith is very feeble and one finds it very hard to believe the scriptures. Just like when I first heard from Madhu Pandit Prabhu in one of his association. He was speaking about spiritual world. And I was thinking, how can he say about spiritual world? Did he go there? How does he know? How can he say that is spiritual world? So like this, one may wonder, how can one say all these things? Why should I believe these things? And therefore, Prabhupada gives various answers to explain these things. So Prabhupada says that we have to have some authority. There is no way that we cannot live without having any authority. We consider someone to be authority. Some people consider oneself to be an authority. Some people consider some scientist to be an authority. Some people may consider whatever my teacher is saying, whatever the newspaper is saying, as an authority. But in some way or other, everyone has an authority. While some others may think that the scriptures are the authority. So in this way, one can see that there can be many authorities. But then we see that in today's world, there is a great emphasis on the authority of science. But then we should also recognize that science, there are many subject matters which are not under the purview of science. Sometimes when we think of science, we think that science can answer everything, all the phenomena. It can answer everything. No, it's not true. Science is also limited in its purview of what it can understand and to the degree to which it can understand. That has to be understood. There are many subject matters which are beyond the purview of science. So one simple example is that the idea of consciousness in the soul is beyond the purview of science. So science, when it functions, when people study the science through its empirical means, they study things which are within a small boundary, in a small range. For example, if the energy scale is too high, if the energy is very, very high, like the sun, glowing sun, there's so much energy in sun, I cannot go and understand what is happening there because I'll be burnt. Similarly, in laboratories, when they want to make some high energy physics, they're very, very afraid because you cannot handle high energy beyond a point. So they consider that if there is too much of energy, I cannot study. Similarly, if there is too less of an energy, I cannot detect it. Therefore, there are sometimes these gravitational waves or some other cosmic waves that they come. They're very fine. They're very, very small in energy scale. So it requires a huge setup to make a detection of that small energy. So if it's in energy scale, if it's too high or too low, I cannot study. Similarly, in time scale, if something takes so much amount of time for something to happen, then my lifetime, so many lifetimes will not be sufficient to study that. So anything that happens for so long period of time, just like we said, the Brahma's age of life, day of Brahma, the age of Brahma, it is not possible for any scientist to estimate or calculate these things because it's beyond the scope of understanding what is this time scale is all about. Similarly, if there is too much difference in the space, if it is too far away from us, then I cannot use any of the equipments to understand. And neither if it is too small, which I cannot see, I cannot make sense of it. So again, there are so many things which lie beyond the purview of what I can directly see. And therefore, one may go on theorizing. Theorizing is one way of making a sense of things, but that does not necessarily mean that it's true. So as we see, there can be the energy scale, the time scale, the space, the scale at length. And in this way, there are various limitations of the scientific methods that one can apply. And similarly, one also must recognize that even the living entity who is making sense of these empirical methods is also limited, is also conditioned by 4 defects. And therefore, when one is applying these defective application of one's own faculties, cognitive faculties, which are not all perfect, and then using a certain limited scope of measurements that one can make, then one can very soon see that the scale in which the science can understand things is very limited. Similarly, one can also see that even though, let's say, I can study this planet Earth forget I cannot see Mars, I cannot study it very well. Even if I want to study this planet Earth, it is so difficult. There are so many things that are happening simultaneously, they're so complex. Sometimes, even simple things, curing a small diseases sometimes can take many, many years, many, many decades. And that too, one disease after doing so many trials and things like that. In that way, there are so many phenomena that is happening. They are happening in front of us, but yet we may not be able to explain them. That is because it also requires a certain qualification of the living entity to understand few things. Otherwise, the laws of nature are also very inconceivable. But unless one is not elevated in knowledge the right way, one cannot make sense of a lot of things in this world. Just like science cannot make a lot of sense about what is life, what is death, what is happening in between these two, what is happiness, where can one find true happiness. So despite so much advancement in science, we can see even the simple aspects of existence, which are basic for everyone to live with, is not completely understood. Mental equilibrium is so hard to find. We have made so much advancement in digital and so-called technologies, but mental equilibrium is so hard to find. It is very difficult to find peaceful existence. There is always turbulence, either in small scale or large scale. How are that, despite so much advancement, we are not able to understand? Because this is scientific advancement is not a complete understanding of the entire creation of existence. It does not lead to all understanding to its completeness. Therefore, there is another kind of authority, which is the scriptural authority, which is accepted by the great spiritual authorities. Prabhupada always gives the example of various great acharyas, Shankaracharya, Madhvacharya, or Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the various acharyas coming in other Vaishnava sampradayas, and also the previous acharyas. And Prabhupada often says that all these acharyas are free from the defects of the conditioned souls. And therefore, their words are to be understood to be true because they have accepted these teachings of the scriptures. And they are further explaining through their commentary that is because they're free from these defects. Furthermore, one can also apply these principles. And just like the scriptures also tell us how should we approach the scriptures, how should we read scriptures, how should we understand scriptures, what is the method that is also given in the scriptures. So when one undergoes this process that is mentioned by the great acharyas, by the scriptures, as how it is to be followed, we can make sense of what the scriptures are saying. And as we gradually make advancement in this process of the recommended process of the scriptures by the acharyas, we will see these things to be, yes, they are true. We develop our faith in these instructions. We develop faith, yes, there is a world which is beyond this temporary manifestation, which is anyways not ever possible for the scientific community to understand because it is too far. Even by mechanical arrangement, one can't go beyond this, even the small universe. It's so hard to understand what lies beyond many, many universes in one's own lifetime. So it is very important that we all develop, understand, and develop our faith in the scriptures by hearing from a bona fide spiritual master, by hearing the association of devotees, and putting in right questions, right inquiry in a submissive mood. Then, by the mercy of the spiritual master and the Lord, everything becomes revealed in the heart. Just like when Srila Prabhupada was hearing from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj near Radhakund during the Vrindavan Parikrama, when he heard the description of the spiritual world, Prabhupada explains how he could see that, how he could realize and see that. So it is possible by the mercy of the spiritual master and the Lord to understand and develop greater faith in all of the subject matter. And also the scriptures very systematically present how there are different natures of existence. There is the material existence, so there are just 24 elements that create the material existence. And beyond these 24 elements, there is the spiritual existence, the Lord, and these different incarnations. And spiritual, the spiritual existence is also known as Paravyoma. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, there is wonderful description of the Vaikuntha planets and even the Goloka, the spiritual planet. So in this way, we can see that Srimad Bhagavatam provides even furthermore description of the different planetary, spiritual planetary systems. And similarly, in Chaitanya Charitamrita also, we see various descriptions of these spiritual planets. In fact, especially when describing the various incarnations of the Lord, in the Adi Lila, in the 5th chapter, we can see the description of various spiritual planets. And so here it is very important to note that these spiritual planets are not made by any material elements. They are made by the internal potency of the Lord. And therefore, qualitatively, the nature of that existence is completely different. Now, again, in the spiritual world, there is great variegatedness. It is not just one, it is very much variegated. So there is the Supreme Lord, the different planets. There is also the personal rays that are emanating from the Lord. The rays, the glowing rays which are emanating from the Lord, which is nothing but the impersonal Brahman, all pervading impersonal Brahman. And within this impersonal Brahman, there are various Vaikuntha planets. Now we can see how that there are so many planets in this material world, and this entire material world, material existence, is compared to just 1/4 of the Lord's existence. And therefore, if this material existence itself is so vast and so huge, and if it is to be multiplied 3 times, one can understand how large is the spiritual existence. And definitely for a common man, it is very, very difficult to understand what a Vaikuntha Loka is, what spiritual world looks like. And for many people, it looks like myth, some sort of illusion, or some sort of a creation by the common mundane man. But it is not true. In fact, Prabhupada says that even the dhams in the material world are the exact copies are the replica of the spiritual world. And someone may say, oh, I cannot understand this. Even that requires a certain qualification to understand. But then Prabhupada even simplifies and says that even these temples are actually spiritual world. That if one carefully one lives in the temple the way one has to live in the association of devotees, if one were to do that, one could see that one is free from anxiety. And sometimes someone may say, oh, how do I even understand that even these temples are like the spiritual world? Because I just come and go, so it does not appear to me that these are looking like any different from the normal buildings that I see. But then Prabhupada also mentions how one can see what is a spiritual world. So Prabhupada writes a letter to a devotee from Melbourne in 1974, and he says, as soon as you offer yourself to be enjoyed by Krishna as servant, according to his order, you serve. Then immediately you are in the spiritual world. So sometimes, in order to understand the spiritual world, we may think, oh, we have to only go back to the spiritual world. Or someone may think, oh, I'll go back to some other place and see the spiritual world. Or maybe I need to go to a temple to the spiritual world. But Prabhupada is saying, as soon as you offer yourself to be enjoyed by Krishna as servant, according to his order you serve, then immediately you are in the spiritual world. If you want to remain in the spiritual world, this temple is the spiritual world. We are not living in Melbourne. This temple is not Melbourne. It is Vaikuntha. It is Vrindavana. So if you stick to this temple service, Krishna service, then you're not in this material world. So one important significant factor for us to easily experience and understand the spiritual world is by engaging ourselves in Krishna's service. So if one is really engaged in Krishna's service, one is not in the material world. But as soon as you move away from the mentality of being a servant, when there is no mentality of service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one's activities are material. So this is the difference between the spiritual world and the material world, is a mentality of service. Nirvande Krishna Sambandhe Yukta Vaya. So when we have this service attitude, when we are engaged in service as ordered, the right attitude, the right mood, immediately we are in the spiritual world. Immediately we see an existence free from anxiety, free from all mundane inabilities of the material existence. And therefore, devotees who get a glimpse of this by doing some service to Krishna and the spiritual master, they become more serious. The Lord also gives us glimpses to his devotees so that they can see and appreciate, oh, how beautiful is spiritual life. How beautiful is spiritual service. How beautiful is the spiritual world. I must do more service. I must go back to the spiritual world. Why am I struggling unwantedly here? So this is Krishna consciousness movement that Srila Prabhupada has established, is to give an opportunity for all this Bhuta Gramaha, all of us, the aggregate of living entities who are existing in this material world, to develop this mentality of service. As soon as we develop this mentality of the service, Prabhupada says, one's activities become spiritualized. And as soon as one is doing spiritual activities, one is in the spiritual world. So, therefore, although it may look like difficult for a beginner to understand that, oh, there exist spiritual planets, there exist so many wonderful qualities of spiritual planets, but by following the instructions of a bona fide spiritual master, one can very quickly get a glimpse. And in fact, for sure, by following these instructions, one can, at the end of the life, go back to the spiritual world. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions.